Hey guys, how are you all? Welcome to Let's Start Story on What If Harry Became the New Dark Lord to Kill Voldemort. So do 4 blue hearts comment, be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video and please share with your friends and watch till end. Also check out Patreon for I have upload Harry with multi-girls uncensored spicy version, link in description. Let's just keep our fingers crossed and hope for the best. Let's just keep our fingers crossed and hope for the best. Motto of the Chudley Cannons. This is a little trifle I whipped up at the request of a few people. Warning. Danger Will Robinson, this is fluff. Ron and Hermione fluff at that. If you are not a Ron-Hermione shipper, you will hate this. I am a fully paid member of the good ship RHARGG. Now the song is going through my head. It is part of the O of my other fics, but has more in common with the humor of secret passages and pixies than the more serious works. I was originally only posting this at SQ, as they are completely responsible for its existence, but I was asked to put it here. So there you are. Disclaimer. I love J.K. Rowling. I wish I had T.H.E. inspirations commuting she did on that train all those years ago. Sadly, as I sit on the deck to the ferry taking me from Alameda to San Francisco, it is just not happening. So I humbly, and without any profit, borrow her amazing world. Take that, NK, stuffer. For my sister, who has just told me I'm to be an auntie, and my dad, who, despite being a stuffy old investment banker, has become a huge Harry Potter fan. His only complaint: not enough Quidditch. He now carries a copy of Quidditch Through the Ages in his briefcase to read between meetings. I know, I saw it in there. Ron managed, just, to stop himself from throttling Houghton Adams. He wasn't concerned so much by the fact that a 22-year-old launching himself so ungraciously at a man 20 years his senior would be seen as bad sport. But he was in enough trouble with Hermione at the moment as it was. I can't believe she insisted on coming today. Spends most of her life not giving a toss about Quidditch, now all of a sudden. She's debating strategy with Harry at the dinner table. There had been a bit of an uproar last night when Hermione announced that they would both be going to the match. What? Are you mad? You're ABO. Oot to have a baby and you want to go sit in a box and watch Quidditch? Certainly not. Ron, don't be ridiculous. Tomorrow the Cannons might, for the first time in over a century, move into first place in the league. And you think I'm going to sit around here and just wait to give birth? Not a chance. This is very important for you, for us, and I'm not having you miss it. I've already spoken to Mr. Adams. What? What for? I'll take the day off to be with you. Well, I'm going to be at the game, so I guess you're too. Hermione. She shook her head at him before he could say anything else. Give me one good reason I shouldn't go, Ron. My wife giving birth in the owner's box wasn't exactly the pregame entertainment I had planned. Don't be crude. That's not going to happen. The baby hasn't even shifted all the way yet. And I've not felt a single pang. Ron looked at her sharply. Pang. What pang? Pangs, heart. Babies don't just suddenly appear, they take a while, and I'll have lots of advance warning. The doctor says. The doctor's never had a baby, now has he. Ron interrupted her, and instantly wished he'd managed to stop that outburst as Hermione slowly raised an eyebrow at him. Her lips going a little tight. Considering he's been delivering children for over 40 years, Ron, I think he just might know a bit on the subject. And, if you insist on an experienced voice, Katie, who I do believe you are well aware has had 3 children herself, has explained the early symptoms of real labor in excellent detail. Actually, she was explaining them to Sirius, whom Liz assures me is tied with you in the overwrought department and she's not even due for another 6 weeks. Perhaps I should have had Katie do the same for you. Ron went a little red, but managed to hold his tongue while he considered his next move. I won't have it. He didn't get the chance to try another tactic, however, as Hermione pushed herself up from the table and reached down to gather her dinner dishes. Gently swatting his hand away as he leapt up and reached over to do it for her. She did smile at him, however. I promise if I feel anything that suggests the baby might be on its way, we'll leave. You haven't been reading those books I gave you, have you? Ron groaned. No. I mean, yes, I've read the books, some of them at least, but no, we are not going to the match. That's just insane. And that's all I have to say about it. Hermione glared at him, and he instantly knew he'd crossed the line, but was damned if he was going to back down now. No, not a chance. No way. The wee Asleys arrived at the Chudley Cannons Quidditch Arena several hours before the start of the game, as Ron had any number of things to see to before the match started. Hermione had suggested that she see Old just go over to the Lupins and arrive later with the others, but Ron demanded she stay where he could see her once he'd resolved himself to the fact that she was getting her way on this matter. He had fumed a bit as he saw her struggle to repress a smile and turn quickly from him to get her cloak when he told her that, but did keep his mouth shut. Hoden Adams, the owner of the team and Ron's boss, was startled to see her following Ron into the box. "Ah, Weasley. And, Mrs. Weasley. Good heavens, I didn't really expect to see you here. But of course I'm delighted." Adams came over to where they stood quickly and shook Hermione's hand, then pulled her forward. Sit down, right here, most comfortable seat in the place, I think. How are you?" Good, he said, before Hermione had a chance to say anything. Hermione grinned at Ron and rolled her eyes a bit as Adams turned from her to look at her husband with a puzzled expression, then gave Hermione another bright smile before he took Ron's arm and pulled him back in the direction they had come from towards the door. Adams leaned in close and whispered, "What on earth were you thinking making Hermione come to this match?" "Very insensitive, Ron. Very insensitive. I thought you were taking, the day off." "Well, nothing to be done, now I suspect. But next time, young man, think about these things. She can't possibly be comfortable." Ron fumed, but luckily before he said or did anything, Adams let go of his arm and straightened back up to his rather intimidating 6'3" height and turned back towards the front. Speaking in his normal, vaguely dreamy tones. "Ron, get down to the office and fetch my notes, would you? I seem to have forgotten them, and if you see Caston on the way, tell him to get up here. Make sure all of the, are here, would you? Good lad." Ron bolted from the owner's box before he caught Hermione's eye, but he could just feel her gaze following him. No way. Had she missed the expression on his face just then? Sighing, he jogged down the steep steps of the area's main staircase towards the clubhouse. "I think I'll have an entirely new definition of long day after this." Bloody hell. Hoden Adams was, basically, a wonderful man to work for, and an excellent sports strategist, though he did tend to get a little spacey and just sort of talk into the air, rather than talk directly at anyone. He had been a classmate of Remus and Sirius, and it was Remus who had originally put Ron in contact with him when Remus heard that Adams was looking for a junior club manager. Ron was terrified the first time he had gone to see the former All-England keeper, but he had turned out to be a warm and funny man, despite his attention issues, and had been pleased to hire Ron on. And Ron had scored instantly with him when he had gone to find Katie Bell and convinced her to join the team. Katie Bell was one of the main reasons the team was doing so well. It was a standing club joke now to post yet another cover of Quidditch Weekly that featured her in the locker room. She was perturbed at first, titles like hero in the struggle against the Dark Lord finds peace on the pitch and champion chaser chooses Chudley, annoying her no end, but was finally starting to laugh at it all. The wizarding community had become very caught up in the miracle year the Chudley Cannons were having. Generally they had sell-out crowds, as practically every Quidditch match was well attended across the league, but usually one saw far more of the opposing team's colors. Not this year. This year they had opened with 4 straight victories, a team record, and had become the hottest ticket in town. Now Ron stared out at a sea of orange at the home games. Hoden Adams spoke of it all with vague tears in his eyes and a dreamy look on his face, sighing but making no real comments other than, "Keep up the good work, everyone." Caston, the team captain, was the only one he ever talked to in depth. And Caston's main job with the team seemed to be interpreter for Adams. Somehow it worked, and after years of infamy, it looked like the Chudley Cannons might become real contenders once again. Ron went off in search of the always misplaced manager's notes by way of the locker room. He stayed there a bit, chatting with the team, before finally getting back up to the owner's box. The spectators had begun to arrive, and when he got back up to the top of the arena, he saw that Remus had arrived with Sirius and Malcolm. Despite his being totally annoyed and rather perturbed in general, He had to smile when he saw Malcolm, standing at the railing between his father and his godfather. Malcolm was smiling broadly and watching raptly as they were showing him the pitch and pointing things out to him. First game. I remember the first time I got to come to a game, and I can't wait until I get to take my child to his first game. Actually, I might very well have. He looked over at Hermione and had to smile. In spite of his lingering doubts over her being here, Hermione had been thrilled when he told her he had the job with the cannons, knowing it was exactly what he wanted. He had been a little surprised at her enthusiasm at first, worried that she might think it wasn't, well, the most responsible thing in the world. Underestimated her again. She had even Ted coming to the games with him on and off, when she wasn't too busy with the ministry. She'd always come to cheer Gryffindor on at school, of course, but truth was she just wasn't that much of a sports fan. But she was a fan of her husband, and Ron was constantly amazed when he considered that even if had he chosen to be the driver of the night bus, she'd support him. But it really wasn't just any game that day, and Ron, secretly, was actually thrilled to have her there and that she really was keen on what was, with luck, about to happen. Despite the fact that the baby was due, Ron checked his watch, in about 15 hours. If the healer's due date was to be believed. He looked over again to where she sat, now talking with Remus, and sighed. Adams thinks I dragged her here. Is he that insane? Can't believe he called me insensitive. Deep breath, Ron. Deep breath. First off, he is your boss. Second, you will miss it if you're being detained for assault. Sirius may be a lawyer, but he can't speed things up that much. Ron had become torn between watching the cannons finally climb back up in the league and waiting for the baby. Everyone had sworn to him that due dates were just estimations. His mother informed him that he and all 6 of his siblings had been born after the due date set. Mrs. Granger told him Hermione was 3 weeks late herself. Katie and Remus pointed out that Ark and Annie had both been born after their due dates. Notice nobody mentioned Malcolm was born about 3 weeks before he was due. Ron looked back over at Malcolm, who was now standing on one of T. He runs to the gate at the front of the box and leaning out to get a good look at everything while Sirius kept a firm hold of him around his waist. Ron adored Malcolm, and though he hadn't said anything to Hermione, was really hoping they were going to have a boy. Though a daughter would be nice too. He was started from his daydreaming when someone appeared next to him and started speaking. Good gods, Ron, what are you doing here? Harry, why don't you ask the Quidditch fanatic over there? Harry glanced at Hermione then grinned at Ron. She mentioned something about not wanting to miss this. You might have warned me. Grumbled Ron. Sorry. Didn't think she meant it. And there was the possibility she'd be far too busy with other things. Do not, frowned Ron, mention any other things she might be doing. And just wish on the grave of Godric Gryffindor it doesn't happen during the game. I don't know, your first being born here seems somehow appropriate, teased Harry. Shut up. Where's Ginny? Harry started to laugh. Actually, she stayed home because she thought she'd go by your house later to keep Hermione company. Well, at least someone had the sense to stay home. Harry started to giggle, but refrained from further comment as Malcolm ran over to speak with them. He was absolutely glowing and grinning from ear to ear, and Ron just had to smile. Hello Malcolm, glad you could come. And congratulations. I guess we all better watch out now, added Harry, giving Malcolm a rather conspiratorial look. Malcolm gave a laugh and looked quickly back at his father, W. Ho was still engaged with talking to Hermione, then leaned forward and whispered with a rather dangerous grin, thanks. Ron knew that Malcolm had, a few weeks ago, started to display his first magical talents. He had gathered from very scattered reports that it was a rather momentous event that announced young Mr. Lupin had started developing his abilities, but had not had the opportunity to get any details. He hadn't had the chance to ask Remus for any details when he'd invited them to the game. Katie had been with him, and Ron had already been warned not to bring it up in front of her for a few days. Sirius must have done something, despite her firm requests that no testing take place, as she didn't want Malcolm feeling pressured or anxious about this. But he looks as happy as ever. Yes, congratulations. Are you looking forward to the match? Oh, yes, very much. He glanced over his shoulder for a moment to look at Hermione with a rather puzzled expression. Why's Hermione here? Isn't the baby due? Harry managed to choke back most of his laugh as he reached forward and took Malcolm by the shoulders, turning him back in the direction of the others and giving him a small push. Ron stared at the ceiling for a moment and sighed. Just wait, Malcolm, one day, you'll be right where I am now, and we'll see how well you hold out to the whims of your better half. Go take a seat, Malcolm. I'll be right there in a second. Hermione's fine, and I thought you didn't like babies anyway, so there. I don't mind them, they're just useless, grumbled the boy as he wandered back veered to the adults and climbed up next to Sirius again. Ron looked at Harry. Exactly what did Malcolm do? Harry gave him another very amused glance. Well, as it's far too late for you to change your mind about being a parent. I guess I'll tell you. Seems he got his hands on some fireworks and, well, I suspect Sirius didn't expect them to go off quite as well as they did, Malcolm being so little. However, Ron did look rather upset at this. What? Remus' study was quite a mess. Good gods. Yes. Good thing Sirius doesn't live with Katie anymore. Of course, he had to go home to Liz, who had a few choice words herself. Keep that in mind, Ron. Malcolm may be little, but he's quite strong when he puts his mind to it. Sirius explaining that the fireworks would go off better the harder he concentrated on them probably had a lot to do with it. Where there's a will, there's a way. Ron swallowed nervously. This was something he hadn't even started to think about. He'd barely gotten used to the idea of a baby. Let alone a toddler, then a small boy, loose in the house, testing his abilities. Oh my God. Harry laughed again. Don't look like that. With any luck, the child will have Hermione's temperament and you should be somewhat safe. Ron nodded. Of course, he could turn out to be just like Fred and George, too. Thanks. Is it too late to wish for a little girl? Ron fought the urge to start pacing by going over to sit next to Remus, who smiled at him with a rather knowing and confiding look. Ron gave him an exasperated grin and small shake of the head in return, knowing that Remus, more than anyone else, sympathized with what he was feeling right now. Hermione is very like Katie, Remus explained. When I got married that it's an art form learning to balance a life with such a clever and strong partner. He was right, I didn't think that anything would change when we got married, and that I already had a handle on my relationship with Hermione after 9 years. Wrong. Seems too pathetic a word even for that revelation. When you're married and living together, storming off to sulk is not an option. Ron nodded his head in Malcolm's direction, the boy now up and moving. Gee again as he chatted with Houghton Adams. His energy level seems to have gone up threefold in the past year. Is that to be expected? Congratulations. Hope your study has recovered. Remus laughed heartily and glanced over at Malcolm with an adoring look before winking at Ron. All's well. Malcolm is just bursting now, and wants to try all sorts of things. We've had to come down rather firmly on him, of course. But now we spend an hour every day doing very simple things, so he's managing to contain himself. Mostly. Remember when you first started doing magic, Ron? Didn't you want to see what you could really do every minute of every day? Ron thought about that, and then gave a small laugh. Actually, I did. But I needed to for defensive purposes. Mum and Dad kept Fred and George off me while I wasn't able to any magic to fight back, but once I could, well, you can imagine. Remus laughed again. Good point. Hadn't thought of that. Being an only child, I never had that particular issue to contend with. But thanks for pointing it out. Malcolm hasn't got round to teasing his sisters just yet, but it's only a matter of time. We'll have to make it clear that it's not on to use an unfair advantage. I'll coach Rourke and Annie when the time comes. Thank you. But don't let Katie catch you doing it, chuckled Remus. Ron shook his head emphatically. No. And don't rat me out to Hermione. Remus gave him a softer look now. Excited. Yes. And terrified. You'll do wonderfully. I see how you are with Malcolm. You're a natural. Thank you. Means a lot coming from another natural. You think. I never considered myself one. I never expected to have a child, so I never really thought about it. You were such a good teacher, Remus. Remus shook his head, but he still smiled. That's a different thing altogether. Teaching is temporary. Being a parent is all day, every day. And it has much different responsibilities. You just wait. You thought your life changed drastically when you got married. That was nothing. Hermione is your equal, and you've entered into a partnership with her. Your son or daughter is a drastically different relationship, and your life will change profoundly for it. But it's worth every second, if I might say so. In every destroyed room. In every single destroyed room. But try not to laugh when you should be furious, as it undermines your position. Malcolm, do come here. Ron looked back over at Malcolm, who seemed to be engaged in doing something with one of the programs, while Adams watched him with an indulging smile. He stopped instantly at the sound of Remus' voice, gave a rather guilty small smile, and handed the program back to Adams before dutifully coming over to take his father's outstretched hand. Quote, "He's showing he can flip the pages over without touching the book," muttered Remus under his breath before Malcolm reached him. "He knows I don't want him doing anything unsupervised, and certainly not out in public. No real control just yet, and who knows what he might do, however innocently." Ron shook his head and again felt a small tinge of panic at the thought of what it was going to be like once he reached this point. If keeping a constant eye on Malcolm is an issue, imagine what it must be like with a more rambunctious child. "I think I'll have a long talk with Dad." "No, better talk with Mum about it." Malcolm climbed up onto Remus' lap and Remus wrapped his arms around Malcolm rather firmly. "Sorry, Dad. All right. I know you're excited, Malcolm, but please, when I ask you not to do something, don't do it. And the same rule applies for when Mummy says not to do something. We're not trying to be unfair, we're just keeping you safe, understand?" "Yes. Good. I love you. I love you, too." Ron smiled and his panic receded somewhat. He leaned back to glance past Remus at Hermione, who seemed to have caught the exchange between Remus and Malcolm as well, and when she saw Ron looking at her, gave him her own radiant smile. "Oh, I love that look. Same smile I first saw when I asked her to marry me." Eventually, Voldemort was dead. It was almost too much to believe at first. It took several weeks after that final terrible night for it to really sink in. But after the evidence of the battle had been repaired, after the ministry had been rebuilt and the government fully functional again, and after the lost were mourned, the fear had dissipated at last and joyfulness returned to their lives. Harry had arrived at the burrow one day shortly after breakfast, smiling. Ron looked at H.I.M. closely and realized he hadn't seen Harry smile like this in a long time. He was fully recovered physically from what had happened, they all had, but he had been emotionally dark and withdrawn still. Of course, the fact that they had lost Pettigrew that night wasn't helping in the slightest. Harry hadn't bounced back like he usually did after that, and Ron was starting to worry about him. Now he looked more like his old self. "Ron, what are you doing today?" "Well, as I start full-time with the Cannons on Monday," he paused while they grinned at each other, "I thought I'd use this last day of unemployed freedom to take Hermione on a picnic." Harry gave him a rather dubious look. "Ron, it's practically December, you'll freeze. Not very romantic to be sneezing and sniffling at each other, is it?" "Harry, I think I can handle a few heating spells. Sure, it's chilly, but it's still clear." Harry glanced out the window. "Don't know, Ron, looks a little dodgy." "Oh, shut up, Harry. I know what I'm doing." Harry laughed and sat down across from him at the table. Sounds like you're concentrating more on just getting away somewhere private with Hermione." "And if I am, enjoy yourselves." "Any particular reason for the determination?" Ron scowled at him. "Careful. Oh, for goodness sake, Ron. You dithered about for ages before finally admitting you were in love with her, why dither now? You two are a sure thing. Just ask her." "Stop right there. We've had this conversation." "Yes, I've given it real thought. Yes, of course. Of course I want to marry her. But let me choose the right time to ask. We've all just been through so much, we need time." "For what?" asked Harry, now looking a little angry. "Why waste anything you've got? Who knows how much time any of us have?" Ron said nothing and just looked at him. Harry sighed and put his head in his hands for a moment before looking back up with an apologetic smile. "Sorry, mate. Look, I didn't mean for that to sound harsh. I meant well. It just came out wrong. Marry Hermione. Do it sooner rather than later. It means so much to me that you have each other." "Stop, that came out wrong too. You two are my best friends, and I am thrilled for you. And I can't wait to see you get married." "Why wait? There's no point to waiting." Ron nodded and reached for the picnic basket he'd packed earlier. "Harry, I promise. Sooner rather than later. I want the perfect moment to ask. Harry smiled, and then looked back out the window. Better get a move on before it rains, then, or no chance for a perfect moment today. It is not going to rain and I have no intentions of asking today. I'll ask when I'm ready. When we're ready. Fine. Have fun. Ron and Hermione had almost a perfect day, but it did start to cloud up in the afternoon. So they packed up and started walking back to the burrow. They were about halfway there, strolling down a small tree-lined road in contented silence, when the skies opened up. There was no quiet drizzle to warn them. One moment it was chilly but clear, the next they were soaked to the skin as rain pelted them. Startled, they dashed under one of the large trees and stood close to the trunk, looking out at the rain with slightly stunned expressions. Finally Hermione gave a small laugh. What's so funny? Not sure. That was a little sudden, that's all. Harry said it would rain. And I told him not to be so pessimistic. I'll hear about this, I promise you. Hermione giggled and hugged him. It's just a little rain. Little rain. Look at this. The road is already getting flooded. Indeed, puddles had already started to form on the pavement and along the edge of the road. The ground was already wet and waterlogged from showers earlier that week, and parts of the roadside threatened to turn into small ponds rather quickly. Come on, we'll just apparate back the rest of the way, said Ron, pulling one arm away from Hermione to reach for his wand. But she stopped him and shook her head. It's not that far. We're already wet, so let's just finish our walk. I want you all to myself. Ron kissed her for a few moments, then pulled back to look at her. While I am thrilled to the bone at that statement, I'm also getting soaked to the bone, as are you. We really should. Hermione shook her head and pulled back and walked out onto the road again, opening her arms and turning her face up to the rain, her eyes closed. Ron watched her, captivated at seeing the water run over her face, and across her still smiling lips. After a while she lowered her arms and turned back to face him with a smile. Come on. This is wonderful. Hermione, it's getting worse. Ron, we so very nearly lost everything. It's made me appreciate the really simple things all that much more. Something as simple as taking a walk in the rain through the countryside. Right now, I can't think of anything I'd rather do than that. At that, Ron came over to join her, having nothing else to say. He took her hand and watched her for a few moments, then started to laugh. Who would ever have thought? Bossy little Granger, closet romantic, wanting to be one with the rain. She laughed too. Bossy little Granger would have been outraged at the idea. Grown up, wiser Granger knows a thing or two and can think of nothing more romantic than strolling through a storm with her rather handsome and quite wonderful boyfriend. This made them both laugh harder. They stood there in the downpour, shaking with laughter. Finally Hermione grabbed at her soaked hair and pulled it back from her face, fastening it quickly with a small band as she caught Ron's eye and gave him a radiant, but rather mischievous smile. Ron felt his breath catch at the sight, and returned her smile with a questioning look. You know what I loved to do when I was little? Read books. Hermione guffawed at him and gave a little jump. I didn't spend all my time reading, Ron. I also really loved to do this. That she jumped up and came down as heavily as she could in the rather large puddle at his feet, soaking him further and adding mud to the mix. Giving a shout he jumped back, but she followed him, till jumping through the water as hard as she could, laughing again. Right, two can play at this game. Ron launched a counter-attack, drawing a shriek from Hermione who did retreat a bit, but kept up her vigorous sloshing. They must have been yelling and leaping about for several minutes before they finally reached the edge of the road, and Ron's left foot sank heavily into the mud there as he misjudged a jump. Hold it, I'm stuck. Hermione did stop leaping about and came over to offer him an arm to hold to steady himself as he pulled his foot free. It came away from the mud with a shulk noise they could hear even over the sound of the rain pounding on the tress and the pavement, making them both dissolve into giggles again. Ron kept hold of Hermione's shoulder for balance as he held his foot up to inspect the damage and tried to sound indignant as he said, "Look at what you've gone and made me do, woman." She would have none of it, but did lean in closer to give him a very gentle kiss on the lips. Sorry, she whispered. Ron stopped laughing and just gazed at her face. She had changed so much from the bossy little girl he'd met all those years ago. Hermione would never be considered a classic beauty. But she was breathtaking in her own simple, no-nonsense fashion. And she looked stunning to him even standing here, wet to the bone, hair a wild mess from the wet and the leaping about. Ron looked at her intently, watching her warm brown eyes and the slight smile on her face. She said nothing else, but seemed content just to stand here with him in this ridiculous rainstorm. Harry's right, this is forever. So why wait? Time isn't to be wasted. We won, but who knows when the next lunatic will rise up. I want this. I want her. I want that life, and I'm not going to waste one more second. Hermione, he said softly, lowering his leg back to the ground so he could turn to face her and grasp her lightly by the arms. Well, I was going to do this properly one day. But, well, I guess I forgot something in all my scheming. I was thinking so much about how to do this, I forgot why I wanted to. He trailed off a bit as she shook her head slightly. What? You're not making any sense, Ron. Quote. Well, that's to be expected, he said with a faint laugh, then smiled at her. I'll try again. Marry me. Hermione's face took on a very unfamiliar look of shock and total surprise. Ron panicked for a moment, and rushed on. I'd wanted to do this the right way, you know. Flowers, dinner, maybe when we were a little older. He grinned, now feeling a determined calm come over him. But what I was trying to say, rather poorly just now, was that I was wasting time trying to think of something perfect that others thought up. This is all about you and me. I love you. And right now, this just seems a perfect time for us. Does that make sense? She nodded mutely, but still said nothing. Ron waited a few moments, watching her and just waiting to see what she'd say. The rain continued to pour over them, and the sky had started to get darker, but he felt, probably for the first time in his life, completely calm. Eventually she gave him a very shaky smile. It is perfect, she whispered. He nodded. This is forever, Hermione. I know that. I've known it for a long time, despite my original reticence and rather pig-headed determination to admit it. Well, I could have. Ron put a finger to her lips. No, I didn't make it easy for either of us, it wasn't you. I wasted some of our time, but I don't want to waste another second. Hermione flung her arms around his shoulders and buried her face against his neck. Forever, he felt her whisper against his neck. Is that a yes? Yes. Good. I love you, Ron, she said, pulling back and finally giving him a huge, happy and very solid smile. Ron just nodded, now feeling tears in his eyes. Forever. Brilliant dodge by Belle. Ron gripped the arms of his seat and leaned forward, feeling himself eyes out of the chair slightly as he watched Katie Bell execute a very tight and perfect loop and spiral around the bludger, only to catch the quaffle she dropped at the bottom of her curve before ooting almost straight up back to the playing field and throwing the ball at Bryson with an artistic accuracy. Bryson takes the quaffle, picking up speed, moves past Sachs and Stewart, and makes for the goal. After an hour and a half of play, the Chudley Cannons and the Ballycastle Bats were tied, 40-40. Ron knew it would be a long day, as the Bats were currently number one and were as determined to hang on to the title as the Cannons were to take it from them. The snitch had been spotted twice, but the first time only the crowd had seen it and startled it away with their roar, and the second time the Cannon's seeker, Cassie McLeod, had been prevented from capturing it at the last second when both Bats' bludgers had managed to come at her from below. O'Keefe stands for the Bats. Arguably nay of the best keepers the Bats have had in recent years, but no match for Bryson. He makes the pass and scores. And with that, Carthusius Bryson makes it 50-40, Cannons, and breaks a long-standing league scoring record. Ron just sat back and slumped a bit in his chair at the announcement, running his hands through his hair. It was already a given that Carthusius was going to break the record today. And despite practically everyone else in the stadium standing to give him an ovation as he took a quick lap about the pitch, waving and grinning, Ron stayed seated, trying to figure out what the next feint was likely to be. He did wave, however, when Bryson swooped up to the box to shake Adam's hand for a second. One record down, one to go. What would make the Cannons' victory today even more exciting was the fact that if they did win, they would become the first team in the history of the English League to climb from last to first such a short time frame. And that was what they were all really focused on, as they figured they were due for something Bryson turned to sail back to the center of the pitch in line with Katie Bell and Betty Kettle, as the whistle sounded and the chasers set off again. Rockylady, Ranting Rocky, Gillander, the Cannon's rather enthusiastic announcer, took up her commentary on the game. And I thought Lee Jordan was dramatic. And they're off again. Abbo Belcher of the Bats takes early possession of the quaffle from the toss, moving over the other players. Here comes our own brilliant Sarson Caston, sending a bludger directly into her line of flight. Belcher gets the quaffle off over her left shoulder, blindly, where it is expertly picked up by her teammate Williams as he comes from below and moves back to the center, taking stock of the field. Trying to get a line on those bludgers. But he's wasting time and Elk is there to prove it. Williams takes an incredible shot to the chest, seeming to never see our bludgers coming at him. You'll have to do better than that, old man, to beat the Cannons. Blake Williams was practically thrown off his broom as the bludger caught him square in the chest. He dropped the quaffle, but was prevented from falling to the ground by the Bats, Seeker, Magnus Derrickson, racing up and throwing an arm around him, pushing Williams forward onto his broom as Derrickson came to a dead stop from a full run at his side. The Cannons' chasers took advantage of the momentary distraction to take possession of the quaffle again, but the Bats' bludgers were right there, stalking Katie Bell and Betty Kettle closely. The Cannons' newest chaser, Kettle, pulls the quaffle close and shots down the field, straight at Stewart. Here's how you see what a bludger is made of. Stewart's holding, and Sax's protecting his position against our own bludgers as they get the ball towards the Bats' end of the field. Ron watched the team starting to cluster behind Kettle, wondering what was up, when he caught McLeod. Give the slightest glance at the ground near the Bats' goal. Feint, here they come. The Cannons' Seeker broke out at that instant, Caston right on her tail, and pulled left and down. The Seeker moves out, a bludger right there with her. The Bats don't seem to be taking the bait, however. Indeed, Magnus Derrickson yelled something and the Bats kept their focus on the Cannons' chasers instead. This finally forced Betty Kettle to roll to the right to avoid colliding with Blake. Unfortunately, Elk came round her too quickly and ran into Sally Moore. The whistle sounded, and the referee signaled a deliberate foul. The announcer seemed to explode. Elk called for BLATCHING. Rubbish. Where do we get these referees from? Muggle schools for the blind. The crowd seemed to agree, and booed. With a particular vehemence as the referee handed the quaffle to Isabeau Belcher and sent her to face Auric Wilmersham at the Cannons' goal for the penalty. The booing flowed seamlessly into a roar of triumph as Wilmersham blocked the shot, and the players barely heard the Bats' captain call a timeout. Hermione seemed to agree with Ranting Rocky. What a ridiculous call. Elk just misjudged. KDDLE was the one trying to knock Blake into next week, for goodness sake. Blatching indeed. What's blatching, Hermione? Asked Malcolm, turning to her. It's very bad sportsmanship, Malcolm, and I never want to hear you've done it. It's when you fly deliberately into someone trying to knock them off their broom. Malcolm raised an eyebrow. Sounds a bit Slytherin, to me, he said, calmly. Sirius. Remus and Ron all guffawed and Sirius leaned across Hermione to shake Malcolm's hand. That's my future lion, he smiled. Malcolm shook his hand with a proud smile, and then looked back to Hermione. Draco didn't ever do that, did he? Ron caught Hermione's eye. Malcolm was fond of Draco, no questions. Of course, he's very fond of a Draco that has nothing to do with the Draco who did more than his fair share of blatching. Hermione smiled. I can't really remember if he did, Malcolm, she said. As Malcolm turned away from her to look back at the pitch, Hermione gave Remus a rather nervous look. Obviously we're both thinking the same thing. That was, basically, a lie. Remus only nodded at her slightly and gave a small shrug. Then Ron heard him whisper, Rule 1, Day 1 of being a parent, some things are best not mentioned. Hermione nodded, but her face got a faraway look as she looked at Malcolm for a moment, and then shifted her gaze to a point somewhere near the top left corner of the front of the box. Ron had become familiar with this look over the past 7 months, and it betrayed a side to Hermione he had been startled to find. She worried a lot about doing this right. Not like she used to obsess about getting a potion or a homework assignment right, but about the entire idea of parenting as a whole. It surprised Ron to find this side to his wife. It wasn't an insecurity, really, but just, well, something she would spend a lot of time thinking about. And to Ron's slight annoyance, no amount of assurances on his part, for he felt no such doubts, didn't do anything to put a stop to it. He had finally complained to his father about it, but Mr. Weasley just smiled at him. Ron, son, think about everything we've all just lived through. Your mother always became very sentimental and rather worried herself near the end of each pregnancy. Because all we ever wanted for you and your brothers and sister was for you to be safe and happy. And sometimes, no matter what you do, you just can't assure that. I think that's what's bothering Hermione. It's not you, and it's not her. I know neither of you doubt for a moment that you'll be wonderful parents, and I certainly have no doubts. But then there's the rest of the world, and sometimes you just can't stop it from hurting the things you love the most. Does that make any sense? Yes, I get the point, thanks. Ron thought of going over to Adams to discuss something with him and take his mind off of worrying for Hermione, but saw that in fact he was deep in conversation with Harry, so decided not to interrupt. Houghton Adams had played with James Potter, and Harry loved to hear Adams regale him with near play-by-play accounts of every game they ever played together for Gryffindor. The man's memory for detail is astounding, but then, since it would seem most of his energy is involved in Quidditch strategy, I really shouldn't be surprised he can recall every plan and every response. And Adams was also, in all likelihood, trying to convince Harry once more to give up the wretched Auror business and play Quidditch. Adams had practically wept the one and only time he saw Harry play when he had agreed to play a practice round with the team, and considered Harry's firm refusal to go professional a tragedy of epic proportions. But since Harry had moved, that left the seat on the other side of Hermione free, so he did stand up now. Giving Malcolm a pat on the shoulder as he did, which earned him a brilliant smile, and sat down quickly next to his wife, wrapping one arm around her shoulders and leaning over to give her a small kiss on the cheek. She giggled a bit, and flushed a little, but did shift to lean against him slightly. Ron had to laugh quietly at that, giving her another small kiss. He and Hermione tended to be very affectionate on their own, but had never been very comfortable showing off in front of others, which earned them no small amount of teasing. Ron had actually led to Harry just the previous week that it just seemed wrong to do that in front of others, as what he and Hermione felt for each other was nobody else's business. Harry had just chuckled. You should follow Remus and Katie's example. They are very affectionate, and don't give a toss about it. I've actually seen them go entire days without speaking much, but they always clasp hands or give each other a kiss when they walk past each other as they go about their own business. Actually, it's oddly comforting to see. Always made me feel, well, safe. Even when everything was anything but. Ron shrugged. Yeah, but it seems appropriate for them. And it's not anything, well, silly, is it? Harry laughed now. You haven't lived in that house. They can be very silly, indeed. You'll have to hear He sonnet Remus wrote entitled, Ode to My Beloved's Enormous Rondundity, which he delivered after dinner one night on bended knee while clasping Katie's hand to his heart. You're joking. Not at all. It was touching actually. Although it took him ages to get through it is serious, Liz, Katie and I all kept screaming with laughter and forcing him to pause. But I never heard Katie grumble ever again about bloody baby blubber. I'm not even going there. Hermione gets a little teary, sometimes looking at herself. I told her she was even more beautiful, which was true as far as I was concerned. But it only set her off in a crying jag and accusing me of being condescending. Well, I could have told you not to do that. You should vet all your comments through your dad or George, or Remus, you know. Get the voice of experience in these matters. Ron gave a hollow laugh. Too right. Especially when trying to not answer gets you in more trouble than answering. It's like living with an augury some days, I swear. And just waiting for it to transmutate into a Jarvey. How's Liz taking all of this? Completely in stride and with hardly a raised hair. But that's Liz for you. Serious as the owner and keeper of unnecessary worries in that house. Yeah, I don't seem to be able to get an image of Liz standing in front of the mirror wailing like Myrtle about her hips. Course, up until a few months ago I wouldn't have pegged Hermione to do it, either. Oh Ron, it'll pass. Hermione says her reactions were all hormonal, whatever that means. You're not reading anything she gave you, are you? Hermione gave a small sigh and actually snuggled a little closer to Ron, now taking hold of his hand draped over her left shoulder and giving it a small squeeze. Everything all right? She smiled. Everything wonderful, heart. What a game. This could go on for a while. Ron nodded and squeezed her hand in return. True. But you stick to our deal, promise. I promise. I really do feel fine. Just, thick. Ah. Ron laughed at her. Thick, as a description for her feelings had come up when she first told him she was pregnant. Within 2 weeks of the announcement none of her clothes felt right. And she trudged down to Diagon Alley to have them let out by Madame Malkin. She and Ginny came home 2 hours after they were expected, loaded down with bags. Both Harry and Ron had gaped. What is all that? Ginny glared at her brother and motioned for Hermione to stay silent as she rounded on Ron. New robes. And a few t-shirts and other muggle things that will make Hermione comfortable. She's pregnant, Ron. Yes, Ginny, I know that. But you can't even tell yet. I can, said Hermione, dropping onto the couch next to Harry, who gave her a sympathetic hug and mock glared at Ron. Ron wasn't having it, but opted for the high road, considering last night's tear fest. Muggle things. Ginny laughed and pulled a pair of soft-looking trousers out of a blue bag. We've been to Marks and Spencer's. Dad should have joined us. I think he would have been thrilled. Harry smiled at Hermione. Marks and Sparks. Even the Queen gets her undies there, Harry, she deadpanned before getting up. And wandering out of the room moaning over feeling thick. Ron came back to the game as he realized the crowd had taken advantage of the pause in the game to start singing the Cannon's theme song. The tune was impossible, but everyone seemed very enthusiastic about making it through. He closed his eyes and listened to the off-key warbling echoing through the arena. Hermione seemed to be humming, but as always refused to actually try and sing. Sirius and Harry sung along with Adam's in grave tones, their faces showing a pinkish tinge from the butterbeer they had been consuming and their eyes twinkling with glee. Remus simply tapped his leg in time with the beat, ginning at Malcolm who laughed as his father jostled him around while still keeping a firm hold of him. Once they finished, the B.A.T.'s supporters tried to reciprocate with a loud rendition of their own, "Bite their toes, Barney, bite their toes," but it was lost between the drowning cries of the Cannons, supporters and the fact their side was divided between getting the song right and also offering up the alternate, and frowned upon, version of the song, "Bite their bums, Barney, bite their bums." Malcolm, thankfully, meant to miss out on the intent of the more daring Ballycastle supporters and looked over at Hermione again, reaching over to tap her arm. What were they singing, Hermione? The Cannon's motto, sweetie. Ron grinned into her hair. Hermione was not one for pet names, but he did notice that after she had become pregnant she had suddenly started addressing Malcolm, on rare occasion, by Katie's also rarely used but heartfelt, sweetie. Remus told Ron that the metamorphosis had begun. Mummydom, he said with a grin, has arrived. What's that? Let's just keep our fingers crossed and hope for the best, Hermione told him. With a smile. Malcolm gave her a rather dubious look. What sort of a motto is that? Ron didn't feel like explaining to Malcolm that it was the result of one of Houghton A.'s now infamous well-meant but poorly executed comments to the press, shortly after he had purchased the team. The wizarding community had dubbed it the unofficial motto for about 3 years after that day before Adams. Always good-humored and not one to let anybody think he wasn't a good sport, made it official and started having it printed on the team's programs and other items. Ron remembered when he was little and that had happened. At the time he thought it was just daft. Now, having worked with Adams for 2 years and forming a pretty good idea of how the man worked, he understood that it was, in fact, a rather brilliant marketing move. Everyone wanted to be part of the joke, and even though the team was a disaster, it still made money thanks to very vigorous merchandising sales. Adams only appeared to be hapless. He was, at the end of the day, anything but. At that instant Malcolm let out a shriek of excitement and clapped his hands, and the glass of butterbeer Remus Haw-D carefully balanced on the back of the armrest seemed to explode, soaking Remus. Arg, I think play has resumed. The Bats have decided to come back and face their inevitable defeat, cried Rocky, collecting a huge roar at the comment. After a moment she resumed her reasonably unbiased play-by-play. Sally Moore, formerly All England, takes the quaffle and dives right, swerving around the bludger aimed by Sarson Caston. Bob Sachs catches up with it, and sends it over to Darusius Stewart on the sides. Obviously the bats are up to something. Ron watched as Sachs and Stewart brought the bludger over to the left of the pitch and hovered for a few moments, hitting the ball between them casually as they watched the quaffle move between the bats, chasers for a while, heading towards the Cannons' goal. Malcolm managed to leap up and run to the front of the box to get a closer look at the players as they hovered for a moment, only a few feet from the edge of the stands. He gaped at them with obvious awe. And Ron could have sworn he saw Bob Sachs give him a wink before she and Stewart shot off to the center of the pitch again. Malcolm ran back to Remus at full speed and launched himself at his father, landing heavily on his lap, forcing Remus to give a grunt as he tired to contain Malcolm's excited squirming as he turned back to the pitch. "Did you see that, Daddy? Did you?" "Yes, my little marauder, I did indeed. They were trying to give their team time by keeping the bludger occupied, you see. The bludger doesn't like staying in one area for too long, so they had to move. It's an offensive tactic, even if it looks defensive. The bludger is ready to get back in the game, now." Malcolm seemed to be glowing, his attention entirely focused on the pitch, even as he gripped Remus, arms tightly. "Oh, Daddy, may I play Quidditch? When you're a little bigger, son?" Malcolm just nodded absently, bouncing excitedly on Remus' legs. "Thanks. Don't mention it," said Remus, smiling and giving Malcolm a small pat on the head, even as he pulled him closer to his chest so he could see around him. Malcolm didn't take to this, however, and wriggled free to stand up and run around Hermione and Ron to Sirius. Sirius gladly let Malcolm stand in front of him, resting his arms on Sirius' knees, as Sirius tousled his hair and said something to Harry, who laughed. Ron saw Malcolm shoot Sirius a quick grin before he turned his attention back to the game. Remus gave Ron a sideways glance, and smiled at something. "Ron, yes, what are you thinking?" Ron laughed. "Well, I was thinking about how, energetic Malcolm has become." "Not that he wasn't." Remus gave a small nod and Ron stopped. "He'll be 6 this October, you know." "Gods, when did that happen?" "Well, anyway, yes. He has definitely started being more independent. It happens, and it will happen with you and your child. At this age they are starting to really form their own ideas and make their own decisions." Malcolm was making his own decisions at 2, Remus, Hermione pointed out very matter-of-factly. Douglas Adams' The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I just have to mention how sad I am that we have lost Douglas Adams. My favorite philosopher. When I left California for the East Coast as a college student, a friend gave me the original BBC tapes of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy to listen to on the long flight. I flew for 4 years, back and forth, listening to the tales of Ford Prefect and Zaphod Beeblebrox, which kept me sane as I traveled, as I was deeply afraid of flying. Nearly 10 years later, as I landed in Los Angeles home from Cairo, on Egyptair, 4 days before that same plane I had taken plunged into the Atlantic, fulfilling my worst nightmares, I was still listening to the Vogons' poetry. The importance of towels, and poor Arthur Dent trying to convince a food dispenser he really did want a cup of warm water soaked with dry leaves for breakfast. Laughter makes you feel invincible. They'll be with me when I take off for Australia in 3 weeks, too. I even named Annie's owl after Zaphod. Of course wizards read these books. So long, Mr. Adams, and thanks for all the fish. I am so cool. You could keep a side of meat in me for a month. I am so hip I have difficulty seeing over my pelvis, Zaphod Beeblebrox. Disclaimer, need I point out I am neither J.K. Rowling nor am I Douglas Adams. Good. I didn't think so. I'm just a fan like the rest of you. Play continued for another hour. The Bats managed to pull ahead by 3 goals at one point, but it only served to increase the energy and determination of both the Cannons, players and the Cannons, fans. Ron couldn't stop himself from glancing nervously at his watch as he noticed it was starting to get a little darker as early evening approached and the groundskeeper moved quietly along the far side of the field getting ready to illuminate the pitch. Unfortunately his watch was on the arm he had around Hermione's shoulders. And she didn't miss his not quite surreptitious enough peek. She slapped his hand slightly and gave a smile. "Run on, I feel fine." "Of course you do," he grumbled, "watch." Elk send the bludger at Sally Moore again. Oh please. I have no desire to give birth anywhere except a nice big bed. I'm taking no chances. Malcolm, please tell Ron not to be such a worrywart. Malcolm glanced over his shoulder at them from where he now sat with Sirius and smiled. Ron, don't be such a worrywart. Yes, Ron, don't be such a worrywart, added Sirius. Ron couldn't resist glaring at him. I'm getting this from you. Sirius shrugged. Bank it for when Liz and I get here in a few weeks. I'm not even going to pretend to be calm. It's been confirmed, deadpanned Harry. Sirius shifted Malcolm so he could lean over nearer to Harry. You are supposed to keep me calm. Isn't that the secret arrangement you made with Liz? I promised Liz I'd try to keep you from driving her mad. Not that I'd keep you calm. Remus laughed. Let me guess, this stems from the pillow and blanket incident. Ron and Hermione also laughed at this comment. Sirius had official. Lee lapped Ron in being the top worrier when he had come home one day laden down with piles of new pillows and blankets, which he draped over practically every chair in the Blacks' flat, worried that Liz wasn't comfortable enough. She'd sent a pile of each to both Katie and Hermione with a note that simply said, "Help." Sirius gave Remus an indignant look. Look, you, just because you've done this before is no reason to get all uppity. Quote, Daddy's not being uppity, Sirius, frowned Malcolm. Oh, yes he is, he's just doing it nicely. Malcolm declined further comment and simply got down from Siri. Lapp and went back over to sit with Remus, putting one arm around his neck and leaning his head into his shoulder. Hermione put one hand over her mouth to hide her grin, and looked up at Ron. Are you really worried I'm going to suddenly have this baby, she whispered in his ear, or are you just anxious to get your hands on the baby? Both, he whispered back. Well, I promise not to they the baby here and to try and have it as soon as possible. Fair. He leaned over to kiss her, ignoring the loud ahs from Sirius and Harry, but not passing up the opportunity to give Sirius a kick in the ankle. Sirius promptly kicked Harry, saying, from Ron, snitch. Adams rarely yelled, but he was on his feet now and leaning over the edge of the box. Everyone stood up, Ron hauling Hermione to her feet, and came to the front next to Adams. The stadium crowd roared as the Seekers both shot upwards. McLeod and Derrickson are after it. Because of the angle of the light, the snitch was obvious, shining in the glare of the setting sun well over the pitch. It seemed to sense the attention, however, and just as the Seekers started to get about 25 feet from it, it plummeted downwards, its wings a blur. Come on McLeod. It's down here. Derrickson rounded back first, and flew in a steep line after the snitch, charging towards the bottom of the pitch. McLeod caught him, however, as the snitch suddenly banked right and made a line for the Bats' end of the field. Sarson Caston had the bludger, though, and he sent it towards the snitch, rather than the Flyers. Caston forces the snitch to change course. It moves up, passing Derrickson towards McLeod. Derrickson made a grab as he tried to turn upwards, but his balance was wrong, and he swerved to the side, not up. McLeod shot past him, about 10 feet over his head, and got the snitch. We've got it. We've got it. Ron could barely believe it, even as McLeod soared past, holding the snitch above her head and screaming like a banshee. Sirius and Harry both threw their arms around Adams, and the three of them cheered and whistled at the top of their lungs, along with practically everyone else in the place. Did you see what happened, Malcolm? Yelled Remus over the din. The Cannons win. He called back, and Ron felt the shock wear off. We did. We won. We're first in the league. At that moment Sarson Caston practically crashed into the box. He leapt from his broom over the railing and extricated Adams from Sirius and Harry to wrap him in his own bear hug. Both men were now openly crying and laughing. They earned it. It's taken them 10 years to get here. Ron smiled at them, staying next to Hermione, but was nearly pulled off his feet as the two other men reached out to pull him in. Know what, Ron? Sarson bellowed at him over the cheering and the cries of the rest of the team as they too flew over to the box. What? I think the only thing more exciting than this would be having a baby. Shut up, Caston, he yelled back, grinning from ear to ear. Caston just moved to hug Hermione. All right, beautiful, the show's all yours now. Thanks, I think, she laughed. Caston, say hello to Malcolm Lupin, it's his first game, called out Adams. Ron watched as Caston reached to shake Malcolm's hand. Did you like it then? Brilliant. Caston laughed and smiled at Remus, who also shook his hand. Congratulations. Thanks, Malcolm. Will we see more of you? Oh yes. Good. Next time, we'll make sure you have one of our gruesome orange shirts. Katie Bell, who called out a loud hello to Remus, and Auric Wilmersham pulled Sarson away at that point. They yanked him back to the edge and forced him onto his broom so the team could fly a few victory laps around the stadium together. The audience roared and the place started lighting up with orange flashes and explosions as the witches and wizards, in violation of at least 5 public conduct laws Ron could name off the top of his head, started celebrating in earnest. For God's sake, Hermione. Don't jump up and down. Hermione just laughed harder at him and instead hugged Harry, who much to Ron's annoyance proceeded to jump up and down with her while they continued to cheer. As the referees started making a half-hearted and basically doomed attempt to stop the fireworks and charms going off at an increasing rate as people became more emboldened, Remus suddenly grabbed Malcolm and pulled him close, crossing Malcolm's arms over his chest and holding his hands tightly. Ron, I think we'll just resist temptation and get out of here, said Remus, managing to look entertained and vaguely worried at the same time. Ron looked down at Malcolm, who was staring at the goings-on with a rapt and rather wistful look. Yes, you may have a point. Remus gave Ron a rather wicked smile, even as he stepped back, pulling an obviously reluctant Malcolm with him. Oh, you'll know just how good an idea it is soon enough. Sirius reached out at that moment, however, to stop him from leaving with Malcolm. Hang on, we'll all go. Katie prepared to have a victory whip up. Liz said I'm not allowed home until I calm down, no matter what happened. Excellent idea. Then Malcolm can show you how he's been getting on with our lessons. Malcolm cheered at this and pulled on Remus' wand arm. Yes. Now. Take us back now. Hang on. We'd love to have everyone back at the house. Katie rather expected it. Hermione, how are you feeling? Are you up to joining us for a while? Hermione rolled her eyes and put her hands on her hips, ignoring the rather strained look Ron gave her. Remus, I expect more from the experienced man of the group. You're getting the benefit of my experience right now, Hermione. Feeling any tightness? Any odd cramps? As I have been saying all day, I feel fine. Thank you, so I vote for the Lupins. Ron, is that okay? Really, I'll understand. Ron considered his answer carefully. Obviously she wanted to go, so did he, truth be told. And it wasn't that far to apparate. She's fine, she's been saying all day she's fine. She is a sensible woman, and wouldn't ask if she didn't really feel fine. It's fine. Ron, Hermione, it's fine. Besides, Katie is a healer and all, so if by some incredible fluke of the universe you are wrong you'll be in good hands. Katie had indeed expected them all, and had a large dinner laid out when they arrived. Harry followed them after going back to the burrow for a few moments to collect Ginny and let the Weasleys know where Ron and Hermione were. Malcolm ignored the food, and Eve forgot Remus' suggestion that he would be allowed to do a little magic as he told his mother about the game. Ron found himself only half listening to the adults as he watched Katie and Malcolm wrap up completely in their own conversation. Soon that'll be Hermione and our son, or daughter. Amazing. As Malcolm calmed down a little, and got to the point where the cannons had won and everyone started celebrating, he finally remembered Remus saying he might be allowed to do some magic. Mummy, Daddy said I might be allowed to show Sirius how I've been getting on. Did he indeed? Remus leaned over and gave her a kiss on the cheek. Just a bit. You want to help him or shall I? I think I will, considering the audience, she said, looking at Sirius, who pretended not to notice as he stood up from the table. Right. Sirius called out. Come, my little marauder. Let's get into the front room, so Hermione can sit on one of those lovely chairs, and you and Mummy get ready for us. Sirius took out his wand and quickly cleared the table, not resisting the impulse to give Malcolm a wink as he did so. Katie wasn't about to let him get the last word. Well, now, Padfoot. If that had been he skill you'd decided to impart upon my son to develop his talents, I wouldn't have been quite so cross, would I? Ron and Hermione lagged a bit, slowly following the others out of the dining room. RMI1 was still smiling widely and held Ron's hand tightly. He smiled back, knowing what she was thinking. Soon, soon, she responded with a happy sigh. You know something? I don't think I'm worried anymore. About anything. What brought on this change? I'm not sure. Maybe it's watching Malcolm, knowing that despite what he's been through in his life, he's about the happiest and most energetic child I've ever seen. Ron nodded and stopped in the front hall with her, before going into the front room. Well, I think his parents have a lot to do with that. Just like we will. We'll be brilliant, I've told you that. Hermione smiled a little wider and hugged him, then laughed. It'll be nice to be able to get close to you again, you know. The little Weasley here is a bit in the way. Oh, that will be nice, won't it? He whispered, kissing her ear. Very. I'm looking forward to it. Though this time I'm not quite so frightened you'll bolt when I put my arms around you. Or faint. I was never going to faint that night. Really, you certainly looked like you might. Ron sighed, remembering the night he had finally, standing on the edge of the lake at Hogwarts and covered in mud tea. Thanks to having been dragged across a large expanse of the lawn by one of Hagrid's winged horses Ron had foolishly agreed to help him corral, told Hermione exactly how he felt. Like so many of the conversations they'd been having at that time, it had started as an argument. Ron had snapped when Hermione, having successfully captured the other animal without incident, had stood there and calmly explained how he had erred by getting his rope around the horse's leg, not his neck. Yes, Hermione, I am quite aware that the rope was supposed to be on the neck, not the blasted leg. I was aiming for the neck, the horse moved. You needn't yell, I was just what? I get it, Hermione. I screwed up. But I'm the one covered in muck, not you, so I really don't see how this in any way puts you out. I was just worried you'd hurt yourself. Well, I didn't, so you needn't worry. Hermione, inexplicably, started to cry. Ron stood there staring at her, feeling helpless and horrible. My own. Please, look, sorry. I'm not hurt. But I just feel like an idiot, I lost my temper. It's not your fault, it's mine. I'm just so on edge, lately. She gave him a wet look, but stopped crying and just shook her head. Ron, we're all on edge. You think I want to leave here in a few days at the end of term. I'm terrified to go home, and I'm terrified that not all of us might be back next year. I can't bear it. I don't want to argue. Why are we arguing? Why do we ever argue? I don't want to see you go, either. I don't want to not be able to see you every day and know you're alright. She watched him silently for a minute before finally whispering, "Why's that, Ron?" Ron couldn't believe the next words finally came out of his mouth. Because I love you, Hermione. And you're no idiot, and I know you know that. And it scares me to death. Ron hugged Hermione a little tighter until she gave a small grunt. Oof, heart, watch the squeezing. Sorry. I guess I might have looked like I was going to pass out. Lucky I didn't. Right. Well, it was hard enough walking back into the tower both being covered in mud with those stupid grins on our faces. Imagine if I'd had to levitate you up there and try and explain what had happened. But it was just your luck to be the first to break that odd little standoff. I would probably have had the same expression in your place. I doubt that. You just missed the opportunity to see it. I'd decided to say something to you, only I was going to say it on the train. I'd already convinced Harry to clear out of our compartment on my signal. Wait a minute, Harry knew. Of course Harry knew, you weed. Whose shoulder do you think I was weeping on waiting for you to come to your senses? But he was the best friend imaginable and said nothing. As I specifically asked him not to. And being bloody entertained having both of us weeping on his shoulder, mumbled Ron. Hermione shook her head against his chest. He was anything but entertained, Ron. I think it hurt him getting caught in the middle like that, but he stuck with us anyway. Why then? I decided spending one more summer moping over you was more than I could take, considering everything that was happening. I knew how you felt, but I needed to hear you say it. I needed that reassurance that at least one good thing was there for us. And he waited a while, before prompting her. He could tell there was more there. And Ron, I couldn't bear the idea that you, or I, might be killed, and we'd never said anything. Ever since those 4th years had been. Don't say it, I know. Yes, I thought you might. Remember when you proposed? I felt like you'd read my mind. You said everything I ever felt, about not wasting any more time. That's why I said yes. You didn't want to waste any more time. No. Well, yes, but mostly because I just knew how well matched we really were. How we think alike, despite what people might say about us. He held her, not wanting to say anything else. Just enjoying a moment of quiet and perfectly matched perfection. Oi, are you two going to keep Malcolm waiting all night? Harry's voice brought them both back to the immediate. And with a quick kiss they went into the living room. Sorry, Malcolm. S'all right. Malcolm, under Katie's close supervision, demonstrated how he'd learned to make water turn various colors. Turn the pages of a book without touching it, which caused Ron to smile at Remus and turn the lights on and off from across the room. Bravo, Malcolm, said Harry. Yes, we've been drinking blue tea for a week now, laughed Katie, hugging Malcolm as he climbed on the couch to sit next to her. He beamed, and snuggled down, suddenly looking rather tired. Malcolm, ready for bed? Asked Remus, watching his son's eyes droop a bit. Might I stay up a little longer? He pleaded, but not sounding convinced it would be approved. It wasn't. No, replied Remus, getting up and coming over to collect him. Up you come. Say good night to everyone, your day is over. Malcolm didn't resist as Remus picked him up and dutifully said good night, giving Sirius a kiss on the cheek when he stood up. Sirius smiled as he sat back down, watching Remus leave with Malcolm. How much longer do you think I'll be getting my goodnight kiss, Katie girl? Sirius said a little sadly. Katie kept her gaze on the door, watching Remus vanish upstairs. You might last up through Christmas, but they are getting rarer. Blame Big Brotherhood more than age. He's the eldest, you know. Yeah, I know. Katie turned back and smiled at him. You'll have a nice replacement soon. Nothing replaces my little marauder, Katie. Oh, Padfoot, it was a tease, don't take it so seriously. Ginny asked to be given details of the game, and Sirius and Harry launched into it. Ron's attention drifted at this point and he shifted to gaze around the room. His idle wandering stopped, however, the second he noticed that Ty was watching Hermione rather intently with a small smile. What? As soon as he looked at Hermione, however, he knew exactly what. She had gone a little pink, and seemed to be nodding, very softly, at Katie, who grinned and stood up. Ron shot to his feet in the same instant. I knew it. It's time, isn't it? That baby is bloody coming now. Hermione frowned. Ron, do watch your language. Katie L. out as she stepped over to Hermione and took her firmly by both hands and helped her to her feet. Hermione, dear, there are some moments in life when we just have to turn our heads. This is one of them. Now, can you feel real contractions, or are you just starting to feel your body tense up a bit? Real contractions. I've been feeling the tense part for about 3 days. Oh, then it is real labor. 3 days. Katie gave him a bit of a look. Ron, swearing is okay, yelling is not. Katie turned to him now and took him by the arms. Ron, relax. Now, Hermione, you have a few options here. But you need to tell me exactly how you feel. Like I've a rope around my middle being pulled tighter. Okay. Does it hurt? Not exactly. Right. This is early yet, but I'd be lying if I didn't say that the fact that you went from being tense to starting to feel contractions, skipping over cramps, nausea and aches, wasn't moving your timetable forward a bit. This may not take that long. Ron gaped at her and started stuttering. What about the 8 or 10 hours you've all been talking about? We may still have that long, we may not. This is not making me feel better. Katie ignored him and took Hermione's hand again. I know you don't want to go to a Muggle hospital. Did your mum and dad finally feel alright with that? Yes. Well, as comfortable as they are going to get. We can take you home. Ron shook his head and actually stamped his foot. Apparate in labor. Certainly not. Ron, don't be silly. What would I have done if this had started at the game? Why do you think I didn't want you to go? Remus came back at that and casually said, Hermione. Labor started has it. Right, that's it. Remus, take Ron to the kitchen this instant and get him a glass of water while I talk to Hermione. Ginny, go to Liz immediately and ask her to contact her and Hermione's physician and have him come here, then have her call the Grangers and tell them someone will collect them shortly. Sirius. Harry, out. Remus and Harry bodily dragged Ron out of the living room. Wait, this is my decision too. No, it is not, Ron, said Remus firmly. Just give them a minute. Katie will take care of her. Ron gave up struggling but just stared at the glass of water Remus pressed into his hand like it was going to hex him. Ron, Harry said, quietly. What? Look. Why don't you go to the burrow and tell your mum and dad what's happening? Excellent idea. See how Hermione holds up once my mum gets here. Ron was vaguely aware of soaking Harry as he practically threw the still full glass of water at him and went to the largest fireplace, and grabbed some flow powder. He didn't realize he'd grabbed a bit too much until he tossed it into the flames and they hot up over his head and a cloud of unused powder drifted towards the ceiling. Ron managed to choke out the burrow as he stepped forward, and could hear the others behind him coughing as well. Luckily, he ended up in his parents' kitchen without incident and jumped out of the fireplace. His father walked in to see who had arrived. Ron, congratulations to the Cannons. Ron shook his head and moved to run down the hall looking for his mother. Baby, now, Lupins, he yelled as he went past, then ran directly into his mother, who let out a shriek and dropped a plate she had been carrying, so that it smashed on the flagstones. Ronald. Ron stopped cold at the tone in his mother's voice. Molly gave him an exasperated look as she took out her wand. With a flick and a whisper she sent the remains of the plate flying into the kitchen. Arthur came over then to hand her her cloak with a large smile on his face. Sounds like it's time for another grandbaby, Molly. Yes, dear, I gathered that. Honestly, Ron, running about and screaming are not a help. Ron nodded, but felt himself start to sweat. Noticing his distress, Molly did smile and give him a hug. Come, dear, don't look like that. Everything is going to be wonderful. Have you told the Grangers? Liz Black is going to call them. Ron didn't miss his father's eyes light up at this, but we need to collect them. I came here first. Molly looked a little dubious. Well, of course they want to get there as soon as possible, but I can't help but think how ill poor Mr. Granger gets from traveling in the Flow network. Arthur shrugged as he put his own cloak on. Well, we can't use a portkey, Molly, dear, they're muggles. Muggles are capable of moving from place to place on their own, Arthur. They may prefer to simply drive from their home. Nothing's going to be happening for a while. Ron gave a blunt and rather unamused laugh at that. Oh, yes, so everyone keeps telling me, then all of a sudden here we are. Yes, dear, it's all a conspiracy against you, she said lightly as she took her cloak from her husband and went to the fireplace in the kitchen, followed by her son and her husband. I'm going over to help Katie with Hermione. You two go and tell the Grangers what is happening. If they want to come back with you, very well. But if they don't, Arthur, just make sure they know the way to the V. Yaj and we'll send someone to collect them. I do take it that this is going to happen at the Lupins. Absolutely, said Ron. She can still apparate too. No. Right, Ronald, we'll see how foolish. You are after you've been through this a few times. Honestly. She vanished into the fire. Ron closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Never again. Arthur chuckled and patted him on the back. I believe I said the same thing when Bill was born. Now, let's get to the Grangers. I do hope they've remembered to have the chimney swept. At least it won't be booby-trapped, Ron muttered. No. Who is telling your brothers? I suspect Ginny go to Percy first, then trick him into being the one to tell George and Fred. If he has any sense he'll just go to the shop and talk directly to Sarah. But I don't want any of them anywhere near me until this is over. Ron, they're your brothers. And look what Fred did to George. Yes, I see your point. I'll keep them off you. Come on, let's just keep our fingers crossed, 3/3. Let's just keep our fingers crossed, 3/3. Conclusion of the fluffy silliness, as we're off to walk the bay to Breakers tomorrow. Run. Run, are you mad? Jim Fix died of a heart attack, you know. Besides, as we've learned, if you run you slosh your martini, which is just not on. As to what Fred did to George, well, that's up to you. It's one of my throwaway lines, like when Sirius, Remus, James and Peter lost the map, the world may never know. Let your own imagination go wild. The Grangers had indeed remembered to sweep their chimney, but that was hardly a surprise. Considering that Mrs. Granger had practically had a heart attack that time, Ron and Hermione had decided it might be fun to just pop over and surprise the Grangers to demonstrate how their new Flow network connection worked. Inadvertently covering the otherwise immaculate white carpet in the front room with the roughly 5 pounds of soot they shook loose. She had tried to say it was nothing, and that she really was happy to see them. But that after they had made an agreement to only arrive in such a fashion if something particularly important was happening. This is particularly important. As soon as Ron stepped onto the hearth, however, he could sense something was amiss. The table in front of the Grangers' sofa had the remains of what looked like dessert and coffee, and it took Ron a moment to realize that they've got guests. His father appeared behind him as soon as he came to this conclusion, unfortunately, and bumped into him. "Careful there, Ron. Now, Dad." "Shush," hissed Ron, reaching up to put a hand over his father's mouth. Arthur looked a little surprised, but did stop talking. That's when they both heard the voices in the hall. "So glad you could come, and so sorry to have to get you out of here like this," they heard Mr. Granger saying, in an overly loud voice. Ron realized he must have heard them. Thank gods they seemed to realize what was going to happen when Liz rang. "Quite all right, Bert," someone replied, and Ron couldn't help but give a shudder. Hermione had been suggesting that perhaps naming the baby after their fathers would be nice. Ron refused point blank to have a son called Bert. Ron and Mr. Weasley stayed very still on the hearth, and after hearing Mrs. Granger also address her soon-to-be ex-guests rather too loudly and the door slam, turned to look at the door. The Grangers practically ran in, and then tried not to look too put out at the sight of the wizards who had suddenly walked out of their cozy little fireplace. Ron realized He still had his hand on his father's mouth at that point, and quickly removed it with a rather sheepish smile. "Mr. Granger, Mrs. Granger, good evening," he said, trying to sound calm. "Ron, Arthur, good to see you both, Mr. Granger managed to laugh slightly then, and shook his head. "We've just had a call from Mrs. Black. How's my girl?" "She's fine, well, she's started, having the baby." Ron turned rather red as he realized he was sounding like a bit of an idiot in front of his in-laws, who rather terrified him much to Hermione's annoyance. It didn't help when his own father ran forward quickly to shake the Grangers' hands vigorously with his usual enthusiasm. "Hermione's in very, very good hands with an excellent healer. You remember Katie Lupin?" "Yes, of course," said Mrs. Granger, even as she gave her husband a rather confused look. "But, I thought that we've gone to fetch her doctor," broke in Ron, "just now. But we were at the Lupins when the labor started and I feel it's best she stay right there and have the baby." They both looked at Ron a little sternly. Ron had expected the Grangers not to be pleased with this. They were a little nervous over the idea of Hermione not going to a Muggle hospital in the first place, but this was obviously an even worse option than the Wizarding Hospital in London, although all of the healers there thought Hermione was a bit daft for wanting to have the baby there in the first place. He stood there trying to think of what to say when his father stepped in and saved him. "Bertram, Bronwyn, I understand that you've been a little nervous about this. No doubt you've been remembering when Hermione herself was born. Molly and I remember well both when we had our first child and when our first grandchild was born. And it's only natural to feel a little, put out. But please, I know you know how that Ron would never let Hermione do anything he didn't feel was best for her. Wizards, as a rule, have their children at home. And have been doing so for centuries. Ron and all his siblings were born in our house. And Katie had all three of her children right there in her and Remus' home. This isn't something rash, or anything untried or unexpected. Hermione, and your grandchild, are in very capable hands, in a safe and comfortable place, surrounded by their friends and family. What better way to start life, And I know that Hermione wants you there as soon as possible as well. What do you say?" Ron felt like bursting into tears at this, but the Grangers still looked a little nervous standing there being lectured, however nicely, by a balding wizard wearing long blue robes and bouncing excitedly on his heels while he grinned at them. It was silent for a few moments, and then Mrs. Granger nodded, and smiled a little shakily at her husband. "Bertram, I think I'll just go back with Arthur and Ron." She eyed the fireplace warily, but stepped forward. "You can follow. I'm coming with you. Right now." Mr. Weasley gave him a sympathetic look. "Mrs. Lupin will be able to give you something at the other end for the, nerves." Mr. Granger went a little green, but did nod, and now smiled at Ron. "It's worth it." Ron pulled out his wand and lit a fire, but then realized he didn't bring any flow powder with him. Horrified, he turned to say something to his father, but as he faced him Mr. Weasley simply reached into his robes and pulled out a small bag with a chuckle. Ron had to give a small laugh of relief. "I've done this before, son. Bronwyn, may I escort you?" "Yes, thank you," she walked deliberately up to the fireplace and took Arthur's arm. "Yes, that's it. Now just close your eyes and hang on." He took some powder out of the bag, and then handed the bag to Ron. Gray timbers. Ron watched his mother-in-law and father step into the flames and vanish with a whoosh, before he turned to Mr. Granger. He gave a nervous smile again, and tried not to let Mr. Granger see just how anxious he was to get back to the Lupins. "Right. Ready, sir. Ron, before we go, let me say to you again what I said when you married my daughter. I am pleased and happy for you both, and I do Elise you would never let anything hurt her." Ron went positively scarlet. "Yes, thank you, Mr. Granger took a deep breath and moved up to the spot his wife had just disappeared from, looking at the flames warily. "You're welcome. Just wanted to get that out while I was still capable of coherent speech. I'll never, under any circumstances, get used to this." Ron came to stand next to him and Mr. Granger took his arm, rather tightly. "Let's go then." "Wait." Mr. Granger looked at Ron's black and orange robes for a moment, and then asked, "Did the cannons win?" Ron gave a small laugh and nodded. "Yes, sir, they did indeed." "Well then this is turning out to be quite a day for you. Congratulations. Now, let's get this rather gruesome little trip over with." Katie was waiting at the other end with a goblet in her hands. As soon as Ron dragged the rather beleaguered-looking figure of his father-in-law out of the fireplace and set him on a chair, she gave it to him and said, "Drink," in a tone that made Mr. Granger instantly down whatever it was she had offered him. His face got its color back almost immediately and he straightened up in his seat with a surprised look. "Feel better, Cat?" I.E. now asked in her normal good-natured voice. "Very much. Excellent in fact." He looked down at the goblet then stood and handed it back to her. "I'd ask for the recipe but I doubt it would do any good. And, come to think of it, I may not really want to know what was in it." "No, I doubt you would," agreed Katie, sending the goblet over to the sink. "Go into the living room, won't you? Hermione's fine and wants to see you both." Ron's rather tenuous calm shattered and his earlier panic came back. "What? Why isn't she upstairs yet? Shouldn't she be in bed?" Katie didn't so much as lift an eyebrow as she ushered them out of the kitchen towards the front of the house. "No, not just yet. She's quite comfortable where she is and it gets rather painful laying down too soon, trust me." When Ron and Mr. Granger got into the living room, Ron groaned at the sight. Hermione had been put in one of the overstuffed chairs and a blanket had been wrapped around her. His mother was on one side and her mother on the other. Both appeared to be fussing, and both were talking, although Hermione seemed not to be listening to either of them. Sirius and Harry had retreated to stand back against the books. Helvzen were leaning against one of the cases with their arms crossed looking rather amused. Ginny was back, with Percy, who looked vaguely disgruntled. He was still dressed for work and Ginny had obviously demanded he leave the ministry and come with her. Then he noticed, to his horror, that his sister-in-law Sarah stood on Percy's left. "If Sarah's here that means..." George threw an arm around his shoulders and shook him. "Ronikins. Bloody exciting this, isn't it? Let go of me, George, and just back off." "Oh, is that any tone?" Ron hissed at his brother through clenched teeth. "I mean it, George." George just smacked him firmly on the back and laughed. "Bit tense, aren't we? And you don't even have to do the hard work." Mr. Granger got around them at this point and went over to Hermione, asking in a loud voice how she was feeling so as to be heard over the mothers. She started to say something then Ron saw her hesitate and look rather strained. He poked George soundly in the ribs to get him to let go and crossed the room to take Hermione's hand. She smiled at him a little tensely. "Give me the word, Hermione, and I'll cast the strongest silencing spell seen on these islands in the last century." "Not practical. But thanks. Mum, I don't need another pillow." Katie appeared out of nowhere and with the practiced skill of someone who had been through this very scenario of 10 managed to back everyone away from Hermione as she handed her a cup. Hermione, that's just some good old-fashioned chamomile and peppermint tea to soothe you. Drink it down, then we will get you upstairs and settled in. You seem to be progressing rather quickly. Quickly. Ron, it'll be hours yet, but yes. That's actually just fine. I had the same experience with Malcolm. And it is prefera. BLE in every fashion to the 2 days our Annie took, I can tell you. Hermione gave Ron a small smile as she sipped the tea, but before he could say anything else, the fireplace flared up, causing both Mr. and Mrs. Granger to jump about a foot, and Liz came forward. She stopped as all conversation came to a halt and everyone looked at her. Well, word does travel fast. Mrs. Granger, Mr. Granger, how are you? They managed to stammer out that they were just fine, thank you. Liz nodded, then took Katie's arm and pulled her towards the door. Excellent. Hermione, you look fine yourself. A word. They vanished out the door. And Ron stood to follow, calling out after Liz asking where the doctor was. Sirius put a hand on his shoulder before he'd rounded the couch. Ron, don't. Trust me. Let T.H.M. discuss whatever they're discussing and you just sit here nicely with your wife. Harry had come over at that and nodded emphatically. He's right, don't do anything and just wait to see what they're up to. Ron gave him a rather desperate look, and then whispered, I don't think the doctor's coming. Why else would Liz want? Just wait for it, Ron, Harry whispered back. So what? Katie's de-live. Read any number of babies, so all in all being here was probably best. But the Grangers will explode. Rubbish. Just you wait. Katie and Liz came back after a few minutes. Liz went to stand with Sirius, wrapping an arm around his waist. And gave Katie a nod. Katie faced Hermione. Hermione, Mr. Tyrrell is, unfortunately, already occupied with another birth, and won't be here for a while, she started. Ron put his head in his hands and didn't dare look at his in-laws, but he heard them both give little noises of surprise. So, my dear, I'll take care of you too, if that's all right with you and Ron. Katie, I wanted to ask you to be my second in the first place, but since you were, well, busy yourself, I didn't want to be a bother. I'm thrilled, really. Hermione, Annie was born a month ago, I still would have helped. I didn't want to take any time away from you and the new baby, that's all. Katie gave her a warm smile, but held out a hand to help her up. You're too sweet sometimes for your own good, Hermione. Remus will, delightedly I might add, take all responsibility for Annie and the other two while you and I take care of this. Shall we get upstairs now? Ron and Katie each took an arm and led her from the room. Ron kept his head down, not looking at the Grangers, but he could feel that they were getting a little more put out. Mr. Granger started to say something, but both Arthur and Molly moved forward and started discussing details of the naming ritual, of all things, pulling Harry forward to block the Grangers' escape as they did so and going on in loud voices about the importance of godparents in wizarding society. Ron decided having his mum and dad here, at the very least, was worth it. As Hermione walked past him on her way out, George gave her hand a squeeze. Good luck, old girl. We'll be right here. Yes, George, that's what worries me, she managed to laugh. Where's the other one? Yes, I'd been wondering that too. You're in luck. Both of you. He's off with Charlie at the moment and who knows what mountainside they've dragged themselves up. We've sent an owl to deliver the word, but you should be safe. For a while at least. Best news I've had all day. At the bottom of the stairs Hermione stopped and turned to Ron. Ron, let me just go up with Katie and get settled, and you deal with that rat pack in there. I'm thrilled that everyone cares, but I just can't take it. I'm sorry, but I have a feeling my parents might be a bit difficult as this goes on. Ron nodded at her and sighed. Perhaps we should just let George entertain them. He tried to joke. You know he terrifies them, Ron. Ever since the rehearsal dinner when he released that boggart during dessert and it rounded on my father and turned into his accountant. Katie giggled at that. Sorry. But I thought that was just hysterical when Harry told us what had happened. Particularly the fact that Percy was the one who tried to explain to your parents how to get rid of it. As it started pulling ledgers out of its briefcase and talking about the land revenue due on their practice. Just give a good laugh, sir, it won't be bothering you anymore, she said, in a rather Ood imitation of Percy's most clipped and formal voice. Both Hermione and Ron did laugh themselves at this. Yes, agreed Ron, luckily we all laughed so hard at Percy we managed to get rid of it rather quickly. Poor Percy. He does mean well, but it would seem most of his good humor went to Fred and George. Percy, said Hermione, is a wonderful chap in his own right, but he should relax more. Anyway, Ron, please give us a bit. As I just want to talk with Katie, then hurry up. Not a problem, but I'll be up there soon. Please do. As Hermione and Katie turned to go upstairs, Remus reappeared. Coming down the staircase balancing Malcolm on one side and holding Rourke against the other shoulder. Both the children gave Hermione sleepy but confused looks. I'm just going to have Sirius take these two back to his place for the duration, as I think we've enough going on. Annie's sound asleep, and I'll just keep an eye on her. Malcolm looked furious. Why does Annie get to stay? Don't you want to go with Sirius? Well, I bet Sirius will let you do some magic. Katie frowned. Sirius will put you to bed and Liz will make sure he does it. Don't look like that, Malcolm, honestly. Come on Hermione. Good night. Malcolm, good night Rourke. Rourke said, bye, softly even as she threatened to fall back asleep on Remus' shoulder. Malcolm did manage a small smile at Hermione as she went past. But turned back to Remus quickly. Dad. Malcolm, this is one of those times when I am going to ask you nicely to just do as I ask without debate. With that he put Malcolm down. And the boy instantly took off for the living room with a rather dark scowl on his face. Remus looked a little cross for a moment, and then gave Ron a vague smile. Tired and cranky, another wonderful parenting experience you get to look forward to. 10 gets you 20. He's trying to rally Sirius against me. I suspect Harry will be spoiling my kid just as much. Yes, he will. Nothing to be done about it. Come on, let's not face the music for a bit. You look like you could use a drink. Remus motioned for Ron to stay where he was, and went to the door of the living room, leaning in to speak with someone, then coming back out. He moved in the direction of his study. I'll let Malcolm think he's getting away with something being up with the adults for a while, as it will make him easier to handle in the long run. Ron followed Remus towards the back of the house. He had to smile when Remus took his wand out with a flourish, gave Rourke a kiss to make her look up and cried, Igneous, SW. Eeping his wand and causing, quite unnecessarily, yellow sparks to flow as he lit the lamps in the room. It had the desired effect and Rourke laughed, even as Remus lifted her up with both arms to Yosh. TLE her happily before setting her down carefully on the sofa. He waved his wand again, saying something Ron couldn't make out. After a moment something flew past Ron and Remus caught it, handing it to Rourke. It was a large plush bear that Remus, 2-year-old, happily accepted and embraced, laying back against the arm of the sofa. Fire whiskey, Ron, please. A small one. Remus gave his daughter nay more caress on her face then went to pour the drinks. Ron kept gazing at Rourke, then looked up when Remus handed him the glass. Thanks. So, son or daughter? What do you mean? Well, which is better? Remus laughed and went to pour 2 other drinks. Ron, that's an impossible question. You love your children simply for who they are. Admittedly it is turning out to be very different, but not all that different. Isn't that right, Arthur? Ron looked over his shoulder to see his father enter the room. Spot on, Remus. Ogden's. Very nice, thank you. Thank Dexter. He sent it over when he eared that Malcolm had started doing magic. Remus and Arthur both laughed at this, then toasted Ron, who just stood there looking strained, even as he smiled. Son, congratulations. Nothing's happened yet, Dad. Well, I'd save it for afterwards, but I think you'll be distracted. Yes, thanks. The men sipped the whiskey in silence, and Ron looked at his father and Remus nervously as they stood side by side smiling at him. What, Ron? Said Remus, now going to sit down so Rourke could climb into his lap, going to sleep again almost instantly. This is going to be a long night. Focus on Hermione, and being there for her. Katie is very good at this, so she should be as comfortable as possible, but if Hermione yells at you, don't take it seriously. What does that mean, Mr. Weasley grinned and nodded his head. Very true. Your mother has said some rather nasty things to me giving birth. But they don't mean it. Well, maybe at the time, but it passes. Ron gaped at both of them and felt himself go a little pale. What things? Quote, you bastard. This is your fault. Don't you ever touch me again. God's help me, but if I get the chance someday I'll show you exactly what this feels like. Remus and Arthur both started laughing, both at the memories and at the expression on Ron's face. He glared at them. I thought, he said tensely, you were trying to cheer me up. Remus shrugged. We're prepping you, that's all. Ron finished his drink and put the glass back down. Yeah, thanks, both of you. I'm going to make sure George hasn't finished off my in-laws, then I'm going upstairs. Arthur and Remus followed him. Remus carrying the now immobile Rourke over one shoulder. Then got back to the living room to find everyone seemed to have settled down. Mrs. Weasley and Mrs. Grange sat opposite each other in front of the fire talking together. Liz had Malcolm sitting with her on another chair, and they seemed to be discussing something in low tones themselves. Mr. Granger had ended up being seated on the sofa between Harry and George, while Percy sat on the floor in front of the low table to one side, much to Ron's astonishment, and Ginny sat on the top of the sofa behind Harry, leaning on his shoulders. Sirius was seated on the floor opposite Percy, and held a pack of cards. Ron stiffened. Oh, don't you bloody dare, Sirius. But Sirius was, indeed, busy explaining the rules to Exploding Snap to Mr. Granger. Before Ron could stop him, he and George demonstrated a hand and managed to create a resounding pop with plenty of smoke between them. As Ron had expected, Mr. Granger gave a nervous laugh, but sat as far back from the table as he could manage. How about we simply play a nice game of chess? He said, pointing at the rather elegant carved wooden set that stood on a table near the couch. The pieces heard this, and instantly straightened up and started calling out as to which color he should choose. Mr. Granger managed to actually turn a little paler at that and backed away from the board, which only agitated the pieces further, and they all moved to the side, calling out after him to come back. They only settled when Remus went over to shush them, threatening to put them in the cupboard if they didn't quiet down. There was a little mumbling as they all retreated and resumed their formations opposite each other, but soon stood still and silent again. Remus gave Sirius a small kick and told him to stand up, then gave him Rourke, who didn't twitch as she was passed. Padfoot, will you and Liz please take Rourke and Malcolm back, will you? And get them to bed, said Remus, giving Malcolm a stern glance. Malcolm glowered further, but got up as Liz gave him a push and stood up herself. Will do, Remus, she said, giving him a hug, then taking Malcolm's hand and drawing him with her to the fire. Come on, sweetie, how about a nice big cup of chocolate before you go to sleep? No, thank you, replied Malcolm rather icily as he continued to glare at Remus, who returned the look impassively. Suit yourself. We'll see you all, +1, tomorrow. Congratulations, Ron. Thanks, he replied, giving a small wave as Sirius grinned once again at him, then moved to vanish into the fire with Rourke. Before Liz could follow, however, Ron stepped forward and knelt down in front of Malcolm. Malcolm, I'm sorry, this is my fault, you know. The baby is coming. Malcolm looked rather surprised. Oh, well, Ron smiled at him. Get some sleep, won't you? Then tomorrow I'll show you my useless baby. Malcolm did smile at last and patted Ron on the cheek. All right. Liz took Malcolm's hand and with a final, good luck, vanished into the fire. Remus came over to stand next to Ron. Natural, he said, very softly. Now, off with you. Before Ron made the door, however, George called out to him. Wait, we need to know what names you've been considering. Ron didn't turn. I'm not going to give in to this. None of your business, Forge. I didn't give you any help with that, did I? Well, no, but I've got a few suggestions, said George, in a teasing, sing-song voice. Not interested, Forge, Ron replied in the same voice. Bernatol. Anscarum. Lineduke. Dad. George. Do shut up. A baby's cry suddenly broke through the bickering, and Ron froze. What? Remus was at the door in an instant and put a hand on Ron's shoulder as he turned to bolt up the stairs. Ron, wrong baby, you haven't missed anything, that's Annie. Come on, let's get upstairs to see to our respective tasks. Ron followed Remus up the stairs. At the landing, they stopped and turned in opposite directions, once Remus pointed down the left hall. Go on. Ron, I know what you're feeling right now, intensely. And can I just say that in a few hours, as overwhelming as this is to you now, it will simply pale in comparison to when you hold that baby for the first time. There is simply nothing to describe it. Ron couldn't think of anything to say, and just nodded. Then turned and walked quickly down the hall to where Hermione, and their child, waited. Ron sat on the windowsill, watching Hermione and the baby with awe. He's just so small. Hermione final. Lee turned her exhausted but happy face to Ron and told him to come over. He practically ran to the bed and sat down next to her. She handed the baby to him. Well, here we are. So, what are we going to call him? Ron couldn't speak as he looked at his son. He waited a while, and then glanced at Hermione. Top points again, heart. He's just perfect. Hermione blushed and stroked his arm. We both did this, Ron. Well, name. Ron shook his head. I can only think of what I don't want to call him. Hermione chuckled. Yes, not Bert, I know that. Ron nodded. Not Bert. George suggested Lineduke. Well, he would, wouldn't he? How about Gary? Hermione looked at the baby, then smiled again. You know, when you first suggested that I didn't like it at all. But he looks like a Gary. Yes, that'll be perfect. Ron handed Gary back to Hermione carefully, and she held the child closely. Gary Weasley. Gary what Weasley? Well, I came up with Gary so you have to think of the other name. Hermione thought about it. Gary Harold Weasley. Ron laughed. I think that would work, and be well received. It's the least we can do, considering what Harry's had to put up with from us. Think he and Ginny will return the compliment. Perhaps, provided they do end up getting married and all that. Hermione gave a huff. Of course they will. When they bother to get round to it. Ron kissed her cheek. Hermione, you sound like serious. That won't do at all. Just let them work things out in their own way. Just like they did with us. Ron stood up, and reluctantly started to go towards the door. So he could go downstairs and face everyone. But as he reached for the doorknob, a sound behind him caused him to hesitate. It took him a moment to hear that it was Hermione. He stood there, not moving as he didn't want to disturb the moment, until he realized what Hermione was doing. Hermione was singing, very softly. Ron managed to stop himself from laughing as he suddenly recognized the tune. Slowly he turned around and walked back to the bed, sitting down once again next to his wife and his new son carefully so as not to disturb them. After a few moments, he joined Hermione's quiet serenade. Let's just keep our fingers crossed, and hope for the best. As ever, thanks to all who enjoyed this. A few quick last notes questions and requests. Further exploits of Annie and Griffin are on the list, but Annie is being difficult. Actually it was Griffin's fault, as Gary did something rather rash and Griffin went after him, and now we're at an impasse, as Annie is refusing to speak to Griffin. Only Tobias Greendoor is happy at the moment. How Malcolm burned down the shed and incurred Remus, wrath as a WIP. See, he's not harmless. If you want to see Harry and Ginny done right, go over to Sugarquill and get reading Xenia and Arabella's latest. Read it anyway. That's today. Join my Patreon.